Joni is our assistant program director, and she has been on the team since 2011. 2011. So with that, Joni, would you like to?
Me.
That is you.
I have my support team over here. I wish I would move over, but you don't have to. So today we're going to be talking about working with parents and why that's important. And so up here I have some pictures of some families. TV, they always have different kinds of families, but it's a sitcom, it's 30 minutes, and they solve all the problems in 30 minutes. So life is a little messier than that, and we don't get our problems with our family solved that quick. So just a quick update on these families, so you can kind of be thinking about how different families are. The first one up here on the top is the Donna Reed Show. Probably not very many people know about the Donna Reed Show, but it was, a little family, and mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she kind of took care of everything. Then we have the Modern Family, and that's a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of problems. The Huxtables, I think it was the Cosby Show, but Huxtables, she was a lawyer, he was a doctor. So they were always busy, but somehow managed to get all their 5 children wrangled and taken care of. And then we have Everybody Loves Raymond, and the grandparents are always involved with their kids and causing chaos. So lots of different families. Can you think of other kinds of families that there might be?
Single parent.
Yes, single parent. So like the Modern Family, that's kind of a blended family because it's his children and then their children and then an adopted child or two. So that's another family. What about adult children raising their siblings? That's a family. Grandparents raising kids? That's another kind of family. So when you're thinking about families, there's lots of ways that you can make up a family. Let's see if I can figure out how to move it. Lee, we're not moving. It's moving earlier. You got me, okay. There we go. Okay. What is the family? The true meaning of a family extends beyond blood ties. So when we're talking about different families, we kind of already talked about how, it can be a blended family, that kind of thing. But the biggest part of it is that they provide love and support and belonging. That's okay.
We've been working with you for so I think it's off.
That's okay. Hey, that's all right. You're not in court, so it's not ringing, so that's a good thing, right? I think we probably all have done that at some point. So we know there's no perfect family, right? Every family has challenges, they make mistakes, and the best thing is if they can grow through those imperfect experiences and come out better on the other side. Okay. In a CPS case, it's important that we look at family first, right? Because those kids do better when they're with family. And I put some paper in front of you, and for those of you at home, be thinking, I want you to write down 3 things about your family that are very important to you. It can be a tradition, Aunt Sue always brings her chocolate pie to every event. It can be about a birthday tradition, just 3 things that are important to your family, whether it's a tradition, a cultural thing, everybody in your family go to A&M, kind of just whatever is important to your family. Hey, Leanne.
Hello, I'm here now.
Thank you.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, well, yes, it'll work. Okay. Everybody got their 3 things? You can keep working on it. I'll talk about it in a minute. So, like I said, it's very important for our kids that we look at family first. Can we always place them with family first? No, but we need to be looking at those families because they help maintain important bonds. Nobody is going to know those children better than their family. So, what do you think would happen if all of a sudden you're removed? You have to leave your home and nobody knows about your tradition. That's fine. You have more? That's fine. Nobody knows about your traditions, the things that are important to your family, and they just get tossed in the trash. How are our kids going to know about things that were important to their family or not? So we have grandparents. And I know all too often there's a bias about grandparents. These are the people that raised the parents of these children. How could they, be trustworthy? Do you think that's true?
Sometimes.
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. But I think that we all have free will, right? We all make choices. We learn to be a parent from our parent, good or bad. So there is some, great parents that have raised children that have not made great choices. But we also have some parents that have not really been too great, and their children have gone on to do amazing things. So, as an example, I don't know if you know the story about Vice President Vance. He was involved with CPS. His mother was a drug user. He lived a very, very chaotic life. His grandparents did the best they could, but they were very poor. And he wound up going to the military, was a Marine. Then he put himself through Yale College, and now he's the vice president of the United States. So our children can become vice president or president. There's no limit. Just because they're in this situation currently doesn't mean that has to ruin or dictate what happens to them in the future, right? If you want to watch that movie, it's on Netflix, and it's called Hillbilly Elegy. So, when there's not a biological family, who should we be looking at? Other people? My kids have an aunt and uncle that are not their aunt and uncle. They've known them since before they were born. My husband and my best friends, and my kids always grew up just calling them aunt and uncle. And so, we even actually, when they were very little, we left our children to them if there was ever, a reason where when we passed away, my husband and I both have large families, but we felt like our best friends had the closest moral compass to what we'd have, and that they would raise them very similar to us. So I'm sure that there's other families that have those kind of situations, an aunt, an uncle, a friend, a neighbor. We've got to think outside the box if they can't be placed with their biological family. You ever think about that? Is that when you think of a CPS parent, do you have a preconceived idea about what they look like? So think about your cases and the first time you met your family or you read the affidavit. So I can tell you my very first case when I was a volunteer advocate, I came in with a lot of preconceived ideas and a lot of bias. First time I pulled up to the foster home, I was amazed that they were licensed to be a foster home. That's not what I thought in my mind a foster home was going to look like. My first family, as I was going into the Smith County Courthouse, I passed a couple of gentlemen, and One of them said, hello, ma'am. And he had on an orange jumpsuit, but I didn't think anything about it. He was very polite. Then I get into the courtroom and my case is called. That's one of my dads. The other dad is also in an orange jumpsuit with chain. So from reading the affidavit before I ever met them, I had an idea that they were going to be scary and mean. And, they had very serious criminal history. And so I had this idea that they were going to somehow look really scary. And they didn't. But that was my, bias, what I thought. Anyone who's in jail, that's what they're going to look like. We've learned a lot since then. So what can we do? How can we start this relationship with the parent? How can we continue that relationship? When do we start? Right. Thank you, Laura. And what is our job? Our job is to put these kids back with their parents first. That's our first goal. That's what CPS or 4 kids families, that's their goal first. Family reunification is always first. If it's safe, we got to make sure that it's safe. But if it's safe, that's what we need to be looking at. So I think, like Laura said, very first meeting, introduce yourself and tell the parents what your job is and how you want this child or children to be returned to them if it's safe. And I think when you do that, they kind of get an idea that you're not against them. They come in already kind of defensive and mad about CPS. They did this, they did that. And they feel like everybody's against them. But when you introduce yourself and you let them know that you are strictly for their child, I think that opens up a lot of communication, a lot of dialogue. So researchers have defined 3 core conditions that are essential to a healthy relationship. The first one is empathy. Everybody know what empathy is versus sympathy? We want to put ourselves in their place. How would we feel? We don't, we got to realize that if this was us, we would feel a certain kind of way. And so we have to empathize with them. And then respect. Yes, they've made bad choices that have put their children in danger. But when they're working this program, we have to respect that. We have to treat them as human beings. Just like my 2 dads in their orange jumpsuit, they're still humans. They were still dads. And I had to respect that, they were going to try and do the best they could for their kids. And like I said, a lot of these families come in mistrustful. The system is against them and everybody's against them. And so we need to build that relationship. It's going to help our kids. And then be genuine. And I think the biggest part of being genuine is being consistent, persistent, and doing what you say. Don't say you're going to do one thing and then do something completely different. And that's true when we're talking with our kids too. Don't tell your kids, I'm going to come see you next Monday. And then you forget because you get busy and you don't see them until, 3 weeks from now. They're counting on us. So with our parents and with our kids, we have to be genuine, consistent, clear, and honest. Depending on the kiddo's age, you want to be as honest as you can with them. Because if they're expecting, mom and dad, because mom and dad a lot of times tend to tell their children, I'm doing everything I can to get you back. I'm working, I'm doing everything. But if that's not true, and your kid's old enough to handle the truth, then we need to be helping them understand. Okay, buzzword. Who has heard about CFE? Yay! Okay, so do we know about the importance of family engagement? Anybody? Amy?
Yeah,
What is the importance of family engagement?
it's connections for kids.
There you go. How can we make those? Yeah. Talking to the parents, talking to the families. trying to get information about the families, how we can preserve these relationships, right? Okay, there's increased family empowerment when you engage the parent, right? They feel like they have ownership. They're going to work a little harder if they feel like they really, truly have some say and some input in how the case goes, right? It also improves the child-parent relationship because if you have strong family engagement, then it's going to be better for the kids. It's more positive. And then it can extend the services outcome. When they're actively involved, then there's a greater likelihood that they're actually going to work their services. If they take ownership of those services and feel like this is really going to benefit me, I really could use some counseling, or I really could use some parenting classes. I don't know how to, I could raise a 2-year-old. I know all about that, but I'm not real sure how I address a teenager now. If they actively take a good role in that and they feel like it's really going to help them, they're going to work those services and they're going to try a little bit harder because they're going to feel like they have, more invested. So I went really, really fast. I talk fast and talk a lot. So who has questions? Who wants to share a story about a good outturn with their families? Anybody have some great stories?
I had one from another county.
Okay, perfect. Tell us.
A family, they were married, mom and dad, and they had 5 kids. And long story short, the father was angry at the mother, and she was nursing the baby, and he threw a half-filled bottle of Sprite and hit the baby in the head. So we had criminal charges. We had all of this. But again, had this case for 2 years, and they're doing great. I mean, he went to counseling. They went to group family counseling. It just became almost one of those things where I went from these parents are horrid to made a terrible mistake, owned up to it in court. It was just, I still hear from this family. They're just, I don't know. It was, as you said, you look and you make a judgment immediately, initially, and you say, oh my, who would do this? Well, anybody who gets angry enough and who has been drinking, all the things.
Right. When did your opinion change about them?
It took a while because he held out for a while. However, right away, he and I sort of connected. I think he looked at me as his mom. And he just, I don't know, he had a great heart, still does. And visited the wife while he was in jail, and she and I got to be close. It was a relationship. We're exactly right. You just look at them as, these could be my kids.
Absolutely.
These definitely could be who have made bad choices.
Yeah. We all make, bad choices. Some are much more detrimental than others, but, there's not anyone who could say I've never made a bad choice. And go ahead.
What happened to the baby? He's under the care of a neurologist. Did have some damage. And was in a foster home for a long time. And, I was pulled because it was a different culture. The foster family was a totally different culture than he was in this family. And I changed my recommendation halfway through the case that he needs to go back home. And there he is, and getting what he needs.
When you changed your recommendation, did you stand alone in that recommendation?
Well, the parents' attorneys loved me.
I'm sure they did.
I think the attorney for the kid, of course, CPS. It was just evolving. Right. It was always evolving, and thankfully, it seems to be sticking. So.
Yeah. Sometimes I think it's real hard when we stand alone. When we are trying to do what is absolutely right for these kiddos, whether it be return to home or, hey, let's slow down and, we want them to go home, but maybe not right now. And when we're standing alone and the child's attorney wants something totally different. That can be real hard.
I just know that was goes along with it, your last slide, be consistent, because I was thinking the same thing, you can have your mind made up. And then you start looking at CPS, or remember, you don't have to agree with them, and then you start changing your opinion, or you don't see the family member like you were seeing them, or everybody's seeing them a different way, just staying consistent.
Right.
But I think it comes down to CASA is the one who's in the home, going there, forming that relationship with those parents, and so many times the attorneys and the CPS caseworker, they don't do that.
Right. And it takes work to build a relationship, right? I mean, are we all, just magically charismatic and can walk into a room and everybody becomes our friend? Not usually. Amy might, but it's real hard for me. I tend to be a little more standoffish until I kind of observe the room and get the feel of how everybody is before I jump right in. But building that relationship with the parents, have you ever had parents that are in jail? It's hard to build a relationship with those folks. But I have received more letters from parents that are in jail thanking me for giving them an update on their kids. They're totally left out. They don't know what's going on, and that's part of building that relationship. Will their children ever be able to be returned to them? Likelihood most times in that 12 months that we're working with them, probably not, but at least they know that there's somebody out there watching, looking over, and taking care of their kids, best interest.
So with that said, is there ever, have you come across a time when you should give up on a parent?
I wouldn't say give up, but when I decide possibly that they can't go back to their parent, yes. When I decide that there's not any other family members, yes. We have to look at alternatives, right? Have you ever had the thought initially, this kiddo would be so much better off if they could just stay in this foster home? This foster home can offer them, the moon. The parents can't offer them that, but the parents are doing well. Poverty's not a reason to remove children just because they don't have the same money that maybe a foster home would have. We still have to look at that family first. What are you thinking?
Well, the example that I'm most familiar with, it is two parents who are no longer together. And there is one that I've pretty well written off and not the other. So, just.
And when you say written off, why?
Incarceration, history of mental illness and drug abuse, and the likelihood of return to that. I think it's pretty evident. And he was the primary abuser of the children, and I just don't think he could ever be trusted to care for them.
Right. Well, that goes back to our job is to put families back together if it's safe. If it's not safe, I don't feel like you're writing a parent off. I feel like you're doing what's best for the child. And, you can always reach out to families and see if there's, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle. I know they do all of that in the beginning of the case, but I have found a lot of times when we get down to, we're going to have a termination trial, all of a sudden they remember long lost Aunt Susie, who didn't know that the kids were in foster care and really, really want them. So if we start those conversations about, okay, if the kids can't come home to you, who else is there? And ask the kids too. There's been numerous times that a child will say, I have a case, had a case where the child had a long-standing relationship with a staff at school, and parents were not able to have him return to them. And after we set him down, we're like, okay, help us think of somebody. He had couple of adult siblings. He had a grandparent that lived out of state, and he was old enough to, really share his thoughts and ideas about where he wanted to spend the rest of his childhood. And he said, if I could live anywhere, I would like to live with I can't remember her name, but Miss Susie. And so, we got in contact with her, and she's like, he's been on my mind. I didn't know what happened to him when he was pulled out of this school. And, can I start having some visits with him? And ultimately, her family adopted him. Yeah. So, it's all about those connections and reaching out and not being afraid to reach out. And, I didn't know who this teacher was, but I went to the school district where she was and met with her, and, we talked about it, and she really did have a deep connection with him. Everything he was telling me, she was telling me. So it's just a matter of putting in extra effort, creating those relationships, and those, it's not easy. I would give you one tip. If you're going to write a parent in jail, make sure you have the return address is this office. Yeah. And then we'll make sure that you get their return letter, because they are going to write you back. I had a father who, it was a horrible case. It was a media case. And for years and years after his children were adopted, he still wrote me wanting, he didn't want anything from me. He just wanted to tell me that he was thinking about his kids and that he was praying for them every night.
Oh,
So that's right. So, if I hadn't have reached out to him at the very beginning of the case, he wouldn't have had anybody to just hear him out. That's all he wanted. He just wanted me to hear him. And, initially I would just send him little quick updates. They're doing great. We couldn't give a lot of information because of the severity of the case, but just, they're doing great. Whatever is advanced to the next grade. So-and-so lost their first tooth. Just little tiny things. And he was very, very grateful to just have any little bit of information. So, anybody have any questions? I feel like I went really fast. Amy, you missed quite a lot. Is there any questions or input you want?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I went fast. I did want to talk about the CFE. There are a couple, when you're in Optima, everybody loves Optima talks. So when you're in Optima, there's a couple of things, drop downs that you can add. One is the CFE meeting, and one is a CFE tool. So the tool is like when you're talking to your kids, and we've talked about this a million times, but there's the 3 trees or the 3 houses or the circle of support, where you're talking to your kids about family members, where they feel safe, where, who do they want involved in their life. So when you talk to your kiddos, there's actually a place in Optima to document that. And if you do any social media checks, backgrounds, looking for, other family members, I will tell you right now that my coworker, Miss Bird, is queen of finding someone. She doesn't stop. She will put somebody's name into Google, and then it goes to this, then it goes to that. I don't know how she does it, but she has found more family members that everybody else has said, this family has no one. There is nobody in this family. And after about 15 to 20 minutes, she's got a list of people that were related to this family in one way or another, just simply by doing social media searches. So you can log that in Optima, and you find out a lot. look at their Facebook pages, and you can find a lot of relationships on there. Sometimes.
Joni, this is Leanne. I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you think
No.
Mrs. Bird could do a training on her research abilities?
She may. She's tried to teach me some, but I'm just too old to learn all her tricks. She's too fast. But
Well,
yeah,
we understand
we'll
that.
talk about that.
Okay, thanks. Sorry to bother you.
Yeah. Does anybody else on Zoom have questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
So when you're talking about like team-based approach between CASA, CPS, Playing for Kids for Family, what's a good scenario then? What's a bad scenario of like the collaboration? Like, have you seen like bad collaborations?
I wouldn't say I have personally seen any bad collaborations. Usually that's like at the very beginning of a case when we sit down and we have family group conference, and CPS is trying to come up with what services the family needs, and the family always has the ability to have input about, I don't think I need substance abuse counseling. I've never used drugs, but I need, I had a horrible childhood myself, and I really need some therapy to help me work through those kind of things. So that's probably best case scenario. Can't think of any bad times that we've collaborated. There's some times we have not collaborated that would have been beneficial if we had have.
Well, I'm experiencing a negative right now because I found two, they're 50-10, former neighbor of this teenager and a former therapist in another city. And I sent their names, birth dates, phone numbers, the other member of the team. And that was like 3 months ago. I have repeatedly sent emails. I include everyone, and they are not yet on her contact list. So a visit on Monday at the place in Arkansas. And it would just be so helpful if this girl could just talk to somebody she knew before. And it hasn't happened yet. So any suggestions of, I'm not really sure what to do.
So I don't know.
Yes, I got your information. I just haven't had time to do that. Well,
Yeah. I don't really know how Smith County Court works as opposed to how our court works. But in our county, Van Zant, if we came up against that, the next time we were in court, we would make a recommendation to the judge.
I did put that in my court report, but then the hearing didn't happen. So it'll be July.
What about the child's attorney?
Well, he's on the emails. You have to see make the specific, please.
Build a relationship with that attorney. Yeah. Yeah. I think that happens a lot with our kids. I know, for instance, Leanne, since I know she's on Zoom, she had that problem. Her kiddo had a mentor from a previous placement and some other people, and it took a long time. I'm not even sure if they're on her call list now, but there's been so many changes. I don't know. But at one point, I think she had finally gotten, some other people on the call list. And that's when we're thinking about our kids. I think that it is important, even if they're not going to go back to their family, they're going to stay, let's say a 17-year-old who's going to age out of care. They're going to stay in CPS care. Who are they going to go to at Christmas? Who's going to be at the hospital when they have their first baby? So some of these people that, even though they may not be able to go live with them, if they can have a relationship with them, that's important.
And that's exactly what the trailer is. No, they won't be placement, but just to hear from them.
Right.
To know that there's somebody out there. She's struggling with her future. What's going to happen to me?
Right. Don't give up. Just keep on keeping them.
I have a comment.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, am I on there?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Just a success story. In a previous case I had, the bio dad was absolutely non-existent in my kid's life until beginning of last year. And throughout the year, he became more involved, supportive, very proactive. And it ended up where my kid had a whole new village with dad's family. And so far it's worked out just great. And that was, like I said, he just was absolutely not in his life at all until last year.
That's awesome. I know we've probably all had some cases like that where I know personally I have cases where mothers don't necessarily want to tell who the father is for one reason or another. A lot of times it's because they don't want the paternal side of the family to know what's going on. So they just say, I don't know who it was. I don't know who the father is. That happens a lot. And so that's another time that we can be persistent. I have, there's been kids that have said, I have grandparents, I have an aunt, I have an uncle, but the parents are saying, no, I don't have any family. So talk to your kids, ask questions about their family, who they feel is their family. Like I said, it doesn't even necessarily have to be biological family. It can be fictive kin, a teacher, whoever they feel safe with. Other questions or comments? Or stories. We like to hear stories about how other people.
Comment on monitored returns.
Oh, please do.
Because that's difficult, talking about parents that do work the services and so they earn their monitored return, and it can be hard to change your mind, from the beginning of the case to when they're completing their services and they are doing better and the kids get to go home and, it's hard to change your mind about how you feel from the beginning of the case, but also what can be difficult is seeing a house that it's not a house you was in, it's not clean enough or it's not nice enough. And that's hard to be non-biased. But, ultimately you have to think about, is it safe? And are the parents doing the best that they can with their circumstances to care for their children?
Right. Because not all kids come into care because their parents are drug users or they've been physically abused. A lot of times, parents fall on hard times. They lose their job, they lose their home, they lose their car. They're stuck. And so, it's not always necessarily about those kinds of abuse that we think about. I was also going to say, kind of bouncing off what Jenny said, if you start building that relationship early in the case, when you get to that monitored return, it's going to be a whole lot easier to get in the house more often to check in on those kids. The parents are not going to be as resistant. They're not going to feel like you're there to catch them doing something bad. They're going to feel like you're there for the best interest, and they're going to want to put their best foot forward for you because they want to impress you. They want you to see how good they're doing, how far they've come. But if you wait and start that relationship when the kids go home, it's going to be hard because they are going to mistrust you. They're going to think you're there to, turn them into CPS or, find something wrong. I've had parents say, oh, I've got dishes in my sink. Well, who doesn't? At some point during the day, everybody's going to have, a dish or two in the sink. Now, if you have, it can go bad, but if it's just, normal things, they're just families just like the rest of us. And, there's times that, somebody knocked on my door, I might be embarrassed, that I had laundry out or, dishes in the sink or whatever. So we have to just, think that our relationship with them, when we create that, if they know that we are not judging them, I think that's the biggest thing, to not be judgmental. And that's very, very hard. Like I said, my first case, I came in 100% judgmental. And thankfully, my supervisor, Miss Amy, she knocked me down real quick, told me that, things were not going to be the way I imagined. So thank you for that.
Joni,
Yes.
on one of my cases, it ended up being someone from church that the child asked about, actually at a circle of support meeting, asked the CPS worker if they'd ever heard of this person's name. And the CPS worker, it was like a light came on, and she went to her computer and said, "Is this person's name blah, blah, blah?" And the girl said yes. And from that point on, the connection was made, and this girl was able to go and be with that family, and they adopted her. So, not only just neighbors and aunts and uncles and friends, but did they ever go to church? Just so happened this family had met this girl and had a place in their heart for her, and had been calling CPS because they did know that she was removed from parents. So they had been calling CPS, and so the worker did have the name, but had not had time to make that connection. So it was a wonderful outcome, a very surprising outcome.
That's great. And I know, some of my advocates have reached out, to different people. And instead of waiting for CPS to do it, they go ahead, they call these people, they kind of vet them, how, where do they live? How do they live? Do they have other kids in their home? Just kind of vet them and then present all that information to CPS. And, if you include a supervisor, a lot of times you get things done a little bit faster. If you've been asking for 6 months and nobody's done this, and I've called and I've checked, and, even with foster families or potential moves to a potential foster home or a potential adoptive home, I have advocates all the time that reach out. They gather their own information so that when a decision is made, it's not solely based on what's written in a home study, because those home studies can be very broad and very vague. So that's very important. And they're building a relationship with that family. So if the child is placed there, that family feels supported as well. Anything else? No? There's snacks. I would suggest everybody get a snack. And I appreciate those that are on Zoom. Oh, yes, Miss Sonia.
One question, going through training classes and all, talking with no experience at all, what would be your best advice for those that are just starting out? Because they're very apprehensive about talking to, especially the biological families. What would be their best first step?
To contact their supervisor so that their supervisor can go with them. I try to make as many first parent-child visits as I can. We're not always notified of when that's going to be, or, we just don't have time. But if you can make that first child-parent visit and introduce yourself to the child, introduce yourself to the parent, that's laying the groundwork right there. And it's in a safe environment because, it's either at CPS office or wherever, but it's a safe environment, neutral ground. But if they're ever apprehensive, they should reach out to their supervisors. I've gone on many and many visits with my, just to give them that reassurance that, hey, I'm here. It's going to be okay. It might look scary, but it's not, safety in numbers. Also going with the CPS worker.
Yes.
A lot of times you can go with them and you get a lot of information, because in Van Zandt County recently, they have started, our caseworkers do their first meeting with the parents where they go over all of their needs to assess all of this. And they've been letting Jenny and I know when they're doing that. And so we go, and that is they ask questions that I never thought about. What are the parents' hobbies? What are, their beliefs? Do they go to church? Just so much information that we wouldn't normally get. So that's another good time. If you can make your relationship right up front with your caseworker. Now, not all caseworkers are going to share that information with you. They're not going to tell you. But if you have a relationship with your caseworker and it's a brand new case, and I know that sometimes our advocates are not signed onto the case at the very beginning, which is a disadvantage. But if we are able to go, I take notes and then I can pass those notes on, to the advocate when they're signing on to a case.
But Johnny, I think it's also important that the CASA visit the parents of the caseworker as well, because so many of them see us in that same mold.
Right.
Another caseworker who's coming, and I've always taken that line from our mission. We work in the best interest of children, and I know that's, you and I share this. I'm talking to the parent. You and I share. I know you want what's best for your child, and that's exactly why we're appointed. Is we're here for the best interest of your child, and I just hope we can work together to see how this is gonna, play out, whatever.
Right.
Just from the very beginning, disarming them. I am not CPS.
Right. That's very important. And like, I know I've got advocates, I've done it myself. We meet outside, I don't drink coffee, but I'll tell them, you want to get a cup of coffee or take them to lunch. There's lots of different things, different ways that you can engage with that family member, just you and the family, the parent or the grandparent. I have a lot in the past. I've had a lot of grandparents that are raising, the kids are placed with them and they're going to raise them because the parents are either incarcerated or they're not interested in making any changes. And so really you're building that relationship with that caregiver, family member, because at the end of the case, that's where the kids are going to be. And they also feel very confused because a lot of times they're not included. They don't have the information. CPS doesn't share that information because a lot of it's confidential. And so they're kind of left out of the loop. They don't know what's going on and they don't feel like they're being heard. So being able to sit down with them as well is a good idea. Anybody else? I can't see everybody that's on Zoom, but anybody on Zoom have any other questions?
Jeff was talking about in the previous case, the biological dad entered his kid's life at age 17. Dad stepped up and became very supportive. Dad's family joined in. Now kids are in a loving, supportive family. And then Diana said, I know that when we were fostering, her CASA was the only one answering questions that she had been asking for a long time. She had an emergency that happened, and CASA was the only one that answered on a Sunday. Just showing how important it is to always be able to answer.
Right. And because they built a relationship with her and she knew that, CASAs would answer on Saturdays, Sundays, weekends, holidays, after hours, all the things, It's what we do. We don't set our kids aside. Oh, it's the weekend. I'm just going to, not answer calls. Sometimes you kind of have to make some boundaries, though. Those are all good stories. Well, I appreciate all of you that are here and everybody that's on Zoom. I appreciate you listening to me ramble. And that's all.
Well, Johnny, thank you so much.
You're
because,
welcome.
You have full-time job working and getting the slides together. So that's just, amazing that you were able to do that. That's all we have. So y'all have a good rest of your day.